It's time again for one of the most exciting tournaments in the world. One of my favorite tournaments of the year, at least. It's Tata Steel Chess 2025. It's edition number 87. And a fantastic lineup we have again, with a lot of top players and upcoming talents. And in round one, we see the game of world champion Gukesh playing with the white pieces against Anish Giri. And what an amazing game! Maybe a very important game also for the outcome of the tournament. Let's have a look what happens in this game. And for sure in the next 2 weeks or so, we are going to have a look at the most exciting games from this event. So stay tuned and subscribe to the channel. Gukesh in round one starts with the move 1, knight f3, knight f6, g3, d5, bishop g2, c5, castling kingside, knight c6, all pretty standard, d4, and after the move e6, we are getting back in like a mainline opening theory after the move c4. It is a full Catalan with pawns on d4 and c4, bishop on g2, and both players, they are pretty well prepared for it. Pawn takes c4 played, and the queen comes out to a4 to pin. The knight on c6, there are also ideas to go knight e5 and attack the knight on c6. So therefore, bishop to d7, unpinning, and indirectly attacking the queen. Pawn takes c5 was played, bishop takes c5, and the queen captures the pawn on c4. So material balance has been restored again. Queen hits the bishop, bishop goes back to e7, knight goes to c3, and black is completing his development here by castling kingside. And well, you may think this is going to be a boring game. Frankly speaking, it's something I had been expecting when I saw this game. I thought, okay, it's a symmetrical position. Very likely at some point, both sides will bring their major pieces to the open files. Pieces can be swapped, but we get to see a completely different game. And that's what happens when you place two very fighting players against each other. So e4 played in the game. White is grabbing space and ready to go e5 to attack the knight. But first there's a rook c8, so that the rook is eyeing the queen on the c file. And therefore, the queen goes back to e2. It's a safe spot for the queen, and from where it also does support the advance of the e-pawn. But black continues here with bishop c5, which is a good move. As now, all of a sudden, there are plans, for instance, to put the queen on e7 and to connect the rooks, but also ideas based on knight d4, aiming for simplifications. It looks pretty much sensible for black. But now, things are heating up with the next move, bishop g5. The bishop comes out to an active square. It's pinning that knight on f6. So the huge threat here is to go e5 and try to win the piece. And black plays h6. And well, you would expect white probably to take on f6. But after queen takes f6, this looks like a pretty much playable position for black. But the next move is a huge shocker. It's a remarkable idea by Gukesh. He played here the move bishop to h4. He wants to maintain the pressure on the diagonal against that knight. But this bishop doesn't have many squares to go to. And in fact, after g5, the principled move, trapping the bishop, white, of course, and he knew it when he played his last move, bishop h4. He knows that he needs to sacrifice the knight on g5. So it's a conscious decision, sharpening up the game here. After pawn takes knight, bishop takes g5, white is having 2 pawns for the piece. But of course, there are still threats based on the move e5, adding more pressure to that knight on f6. But apart from that, also black's king will be exposed for a long period of time. So it's an interesting idea. How should black deal with it? Well, there's this move e5, and that's a good move. On the other hand, you also do weaken the d5 square. So there are always ideas here to get your knight into to d5 at some point. It might have been played here as well, but I do guess that after that move there's bishop e7 to unpin everything, and pieces will be exchanged. That's not what white wants. So instead of playing knight d5, white played very interesting move, queen to d2. Why do we play this move? Well, you do add more pressure to the bishop on d7, as the idea is to take with the bishop on f6, and if the queen takes back, then the bishop on d7 will be hanging. Therefore, bishop e7 was played, so that in case white captures, You can just recapture with the bishop while the queen keeps the other bishop defended. But now after bishop h6, we see another idea of white's last move, queen d2, as white, of course, is hitting the rook on f8. But more importantly, the threat is here to go queen to g5, check, threatening mate on g7. Black needs to stop that mating threat. Played here this move, king h7. Excellent move, giving white the opportunity to get back some material. Bishop takes f8. And here, bishop takes f8 was played, but frankly speaking, I feel like queen takes is more natural, with the possibility of getting the queen over to the king side. You would like to exchange queens as black, as it will make your king safer. But Giri played here the move bishop takes f8. There's also something to say for that, of course. But now white played here the move f4. Opening up the king side, guys. Here you see that the rook is eyeing some weaknesses on the f-file. Bishop e6 played. That's why Giri decided to take back with the bishop on f8, so that he is now offering the exchange of queens. But white played here the move knight d5, avoiding these exchanges, and in fact jumping in with a knight to the center. The knight is well supported by the pawn and the bishop and the queen, and that's not so easy for black. But here Giri played an excellent move, knight b4, attacking the knight on d5 one more time, exploiting that the knight on d5 is pinned and the queen on d2 is unprotected. But white played here this move, pawn takes e5, getting that pawn. But, well, now at least the bishop is somewhat more secure. And, well, they're followed here this move, knight g4. I think it's an excellent move. You have options to win the pawn back on e5 at some point. But I think more importantly, that knight on g4 is needed to generate counterplay against the white king, with possibilities, for instance, to get the bishop to h6 to attack the queen. The bishop may also come to c5. That was a wrong arrow. Bishop c5, for instance. Or at some point, if the knight will be exchanged, maybe the queen can come out to b6. So the knight on g4 is excellently placed. Rook 81. White is centralizing the rook and setting up a threat of knight f6 check. The check against the king, of course, and a discovered attack against the queen on the d-file. So therefore, black dropped back with the king to h8. Good move, according to the machine, well found by Giri. But yeah, what is white going to do here? Well, frankly speaking, I kind of expected here to try to concentrate the forces more on the king side with something like queen f4. Probably black is still quite okay, but king h1 was played. And, well, I guess that Gukesh just wanted to anticipate potential problems on that diagonal, therefore sidestepping with the king. But there are other problems, and king h1 is not a good move. Rook comes in to c2 to attack the queen. The knight on b4 is, of course, well defended, so the queen cannot take the knight. Queen goes to f4 here. But now there is knight takes d5. Excellent idea. And I think that Gukesh, his initial plan may have been to recapture on d5. It's the move he didn't play, but let me show you the following line. There's a beautiful sequence which must have been calculated. Bishop takes pawn. And if you take that bishop, you can sacrifice your queen. And after bishop takes d5, it's a rook takes h2 with check. The king has to go to g1, and then the dark squared bishop comes into the game with check. Rook has to block on f2. But you can capture everything with check. Bishop takes f2, king f1, knight e3. Everything is harmoniously working together. And after king e2, it's bishop takes g3 with check. And the queen will be taken. And, well, this endgame is just completely hopeless for white. So that's a long line. And you may be thinking, well, that's something you will not find over the board. But this is something I'm pretty sure the players have been thinking about in this game. But we are in a critical situation, and Gukesh is really low on time at this point to reach move 40. We're on move 26. He's down to a minute, relying only on 30 seconds increment. And after move 40, of course, they will get additional time. And Giri has here about 13, 14 minutes, something like that. There followed queen f3. White didn't take the knight, but puts the queen on f3 to add more pressure to the d5 knight. And the knight is pinned, cannot move because that will hang the queen. There followed here this move, queen b6. That's an idea we have been talking about already a couple of times. It's possible here. And it does create quite some threats. Pawn takes, d5 was played. Super sharp position with these connected pawns attacking the bishop. The bishop got to retain control over the knight as well. The black king is open. But white's king is also in some sort of trouble. And look at black's next move. Rook f2. Fantastic idea to attack the queen. And the rook cannot be taken. If you do that, it's knight takes f2 with check. And, well, if you go king g1, it's knight takes d1 with check. And black is up a lot of material. So the rook cannot be taken. The queen goes away to c3. And, well, you see that with the queen on c3, if the bishop is going to move, there are these ideas. For instance, if bishop f5, you may go e6 with a check. Apparently, this is still good for black. Anish didn't play the move bishop f5. In this case, well, it's super complicated. Apparently, the machine says that black is better here, but I don't understand anything of what's happening at this point. Anish played also quite a logical move, bishop b4, to attack the queen. But there are some clear drawbacks to this move, because the queen is happy to drop back to c1, keeping an eye on the king side. Well, the h6 square is still covered by the knight, but definitely the queen is looking for a possibility to enter on that part of the board. And well, the bishop is under an attack. The bishop goes to f5. And here, it is the move queen to g5. As announced, that queen is joining the game. And well, it looks like black may have something, but the problem is there is no killer blow here. If you do take on f1, this is a critical line, must have been calculated. Rook takes back, knight f2 check. You can take on f2. And after queen takes f2, it's queen h4 with a double attack. And it's not even the end of the line, because after the king moves queen takes b4, it is super important that both the e1 and the f1 square are covered by white's pieces, so that the queen cannot give a back rank checkmate to the white king. So it's super unclear. And you see that white's queen is active, and black also got to think about his own king. Anish Giri dropped back with his bishop to f8, and you can see this is a loss of time. Probably his position is still okay, but it's super complicated. And here, Gukesh played this move, queen h4. Apparently, a check on h5 is better, but don't ask me why. So after queen h4, probably king g8 is quite a good move. It's super tricky, and in a way, it does make sense to put a king there. Let's say if you go king g8, and if you do play queen g5, it's bishop g7. Everything is so beautifully protected that there are no threats against the black pieces. Well, it didn't happen. Giri played here the move bishop h6. He wants to help the bishop join the action, but the bishop is badly placed. It's pinned, it cannot move, and it actually does create problems. Well, super complicated. What is actually happening here? Gukesh played the move rook d e1, trying to establish some sort of control over all these squares. But there is queen takes b2. All of a sudden, it's black who is entering on the second rank, threatening to take the bishop. Or if the bishop moves, there are ideas to take the pawn on h2. This is a super critical moment in the game. Both players down, only to their increment to reach move 40. Rook takes f2. It's apparently still a playable move. And after, let's say, taking back with the queen, it's rook f1. And the game goes on. It's super complicated. But Gukesh, instead of taking that rook, he played here h3. And in a way, it's very understandable why he wants to do that. Because he wants to attack the knight. And if the knight goes away, the bishop is hanging. Now, the problem is, if you do take with the rook on g2, threatening a check on h2 and mate on g2, white can take the knight and the queen protects the h2 square. There's no possibility to give a check there, and black's position is falling apart. Everything is hanging. But what did Gukesh overlook at this point? This is the move of round one. Well, Anish Giri played a fantastic idea. Bishop to e4. He's ignoring the threat, adding more pressure on that bishop on g2. And all of a sudden, it's black who is winning here. Because what can you do? I mean, if you do take the bishop, it is, for instance, rook takes rook. And then it's queen h2 with checkmate. So definitely, you cannot take on e4. And well, anyway, even if you take something else, let's say you take the knight here, it is rook takes f1 with check, rook takes back, and it's queen takes g2 with checkmate. There are these huge problems. White is unable to generate a counterattack. Black is winning, but the game goes on. Rook takes rook was played. Knight takes f2 with check. There are only 2 squares for the king to go to. Don't go to h2. It does allow knight g4 check. And if you take that knight, it's queen takes g2 with checkmate as the bishop protects the queen. Therefore, king to g1 was played by Gukesh. And here, the most dramatic moment of this game, as here black is missing a beautiful idea. Well, it's super difficult because your bishop is hanging and other things are hanging here as well. But you can play here an amazing move with knight g4. This was not seen by Giri at this point, but the idea is that your knight is defending the bishop, and by moving the knight away, you're opening up the path for the queen along the second rank. If bishop takes bishop, it's queen f2 check, king h1, queen h2 with checkmate. Beautiful cooperation of queen and knight. The alternative, and that's probably something what both players struggled with to find, is that there's also the possibility to take with the rook on e4. Now, the same idea with queen f2, well, there's just king h1, and it's the end of the story. There are no more checks. However, after rook takes e4, the key move, the difficult move you have to find and see in advance from afar, is that there black has this move queen b6 check. That is the killer blow. If the king goes to f1, it's checkmate on f2. Once again, queen and knight working fantastically together. If the king goes into the corner, king h1, then it's time for the move queen to b1. And here, you cannot do anything. You can only block with a rook or with a bishop. In both cases, the queen is just going to capture, and it is leading to checkmate. Absolutely stunning idea missed by Giri. It was a golden opportunity. Instead, he played the move queen b6 immediately, hoping to create some sort of discovered check with a knight, protecting the bishop on h6. But there is the move queen f6. It's a very cold-blooded defense, initiating the exchange of queens because it's check. Black has to take. Everything is hanging. You gotta take the material. Bishop takes g2, king takes g2. Even the knight is still hanging. The knight got a move. But then there is rook e8 check. The king goes to h7. And it's time to run with the d-pawn. Move 40 has been reached. And the d-pawn is decisive here. White is winning. You can try to stop the pawn with knight c5. But there is rook e5. And you want to eliminate that important defender. Now, for instance, if you go knight e6, trying to block the d-pawn in this way, there is rook takes e6, pawn takes, and d7, and the pawn cannot be stopped. The bishop and the king are too far away. Therefore, instead of knight e6, knight e7 is black's last move of the game, as after the move rook e7, it is game over. Black resigned, all the pawns are gonna drop, and most importantly, the knight is no longer able to defend. Because if you do take the pawn on f6, it's d7 and d8, queen is coming. You have to take on d7, and you can even taking the pawn on f7 first, and then after king goes away, you take the knight, and well, white is up, the exchange and the pawn, probably a second pawn as well. This is completely winning. Therefore, after rook e7, Anish Giri resigned. Absolutely dramatic start of Tata Steeel Chess 2025. But it's a very good sign that we are getting to see many more exciting games in this fascinating event. Congratulations to World Champion Gukesh. Hopefully you enjoyed this video as well. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done yet, and I will see you very soon again.